And as a result, your narrative that you're trying to build throughout your presentation could be impacted. So there are a few issues here. Good to see everyone's got their thinking caps on. Now, during the presentation, what if this happens? So you've practiced to make sure that your presentation fits within the 15-minute time frame. You reach the halfway point, look down at the clock, and you discover 5 minutes has passed. You internally start to freak out. What's just happened, and what could you do about it? And this is a very common mistake.
You've rambled on too much. Yeah, realize you've gone over what you assume to be the correct time.
Exactly. Yes. So you've made a mistake with your timing. Obviously, you've gotten a little bit nervous. Maybe you got really excited and you started speaking far too quickly. Alternatively, you've potentially forgotten some of the information that you wanted to talk about. Now, this could happen if you've got notes in front of you. It could also happen if you're ad-libbing and just going off the presentation slides and the key points. But this is a very common experience. So the second part of that question is, though, what do you do about it? You've got 10 more minutes and you're already halfway through your presentation.
Improvise. Yeah.
Okay, improvise. I like that point. Yeah, you could start improvising. If you know your content well, you can improvise. You start elaborating on some other points. Power on and finish early. If you're at the very end of the conference and everybody is dead tired, that is so the correct answer. They will all thank you for it. And then have an extended Q&A. Try to present slower. This is also actually the more correct answer. Slow your speech down. And it's okay to acknowledge, wow, I've reached the halfway point in my presentation and I realized we've still got 10 minutes to go. So I'm just going to slow things down a little bit. It is okay to show your vulnerabilities, even in a professional setting. Everybody in that room will probably relate to it, and you'll actually engender a really good reaction from your audience members. The alternative is yes. If you do finish early, save some time for question and answer, or alternatively, go back and elaborate on some of those points that you did miss. And again, establish, I finished early and I realized I actually forgot some of my key points. So please bear with me as I just go back and elaborate on one or two. Scenario 3, change of presentation mode. So a couple of months ago, you delivered a paper at a conference, and now you need to present the same information as a poster. What are some of the things you need to think about? So we're changing mode from a stand-up 15-minute, 20-minute essentially speech or monologue, and now we need to present our information as a poster. Okay, got some good comments here in the chat. So we need to make sure, first of all, that the information we're providing is more succinct, brief, include more eye-catching visuals, and definitely summarize some of those core points. Reducing the volume of the content, absolutely, because you tend to have an A0 size poster, and that can only carry so much information. And it needs to be easily, it needs to be eye-catching, but it also needs to show information in a visual form, because people are going to be standing quite a distance away from it, and they need to be able to understand your information without you elaborating it to them, because you might be speaking to somebody else. So these are all really good points. Great. Seems like everybody has a pretty clear understanding of the general gist of what we need to do when we go to a conference to present any of these formats. Okay, as well as how to deal with certain issues. To give you a little bit of an overview, okay, conference papers, their purpose is to share your research findings with your academic peers. So your audience members are people who are also doing research or academics who have been in the field for quite a significant amount of time. A paper presentation also shares that important information, but it is really highly focused on the most interesting or relevant aspects. Whereas a conference paper, due to the time, you might be able to elaborate on some of the lesser or less important points. With 3MT, the biggest difference that you've got here is that it's really a non-specialist audience. You're essentially participating in the communication of science to a much broader audience, and so the language you use there may be different. Going back to the conference paper, we are trying out some new ideas whenever we present a conference paper because it's your original research. For a poster, though, the purpose is a little bit different. You're trying to network, generate discussion and a dialogue around your information in your research. Whereas the 3MT, it's all about that communication. Can you communicate your science to the rest of the world? Going back to the conference paper, when it comes to feedback, we're really aiming to gain feedback from specialists, from people within your community. When it comes to a poster presentation, any number of people may come and have a quick look at your poster. So you're going to be interacting with a much more diverse audience who might not necessarily have wanted to go along to your talk because they wanted to go to someone else's talk. And 3MT really is just focusing again on communication skills. It's part of a competition. With a conference paper, we're also aiming to demonstrate our expertise. Poster, again, I've mentioned it's more about that networking, and 3MT, again, focus on the competition. So what we're starting to notice here is that the conference is really about having an engaging monologue that is designed to provoke thought and should be relevant to other scholars. A poster presentation is more like a collegial discussion, and it could be with a diverse range of people. Whereas a 3MT really is an elevator pitch, but it's disguised as a competition. So these are some things that you really do need to think about when you're creating your materials, because each of them does have a very specific purpose and audience in mind. Not to mention, if we have a look down at the very bottom, each of them have different time limits, and they've also got different formats that you need to keep into account. Any questions so far? Give me a thumbs up if you're cool. Yeah, we are happy. Fantastic. Love it. So, understanding your purpose is really the first key step to making and delivering a really effective presentation at a conference or at a competition. So these are some questions that you can ask yourself. First of all, why are you presenting? Okay. 2, what is it that you have to say that fits the context and the format and theme of your chosen presentation mode, but also the conference that you're attending? And then 3rd, what really truly is the most interesting, important, or exciting elements of your research? Because those are the ones that you need to highlight first. Everything else you can add in later on if you happen to have the time. Something that people often forget is really, who is your audience? Are they experts? Are they people from a diverse range of backgrounds? Are they non-experts? And making sure that you're tailoring your language to suit that particular audience. Part of that is also asking yourself, well, what are they expecting to hear from your presentation? This should also be very much linked to your abstract. So when you're writing your abstract to then send away for a conference, really, really think about this question of, what does my audience want to hear about? And what would they expect if they walk into my room? There's been any number of occasions where I've read an abstract, I thought it sounded really great, it was really practical, and all I got was the dry research with zero connection to practical applications. I was incredibly disappointed and very frustrated that I'd wasted my 20 minutes. So make sure you have this in the back of your mind, because you do want your audience to leave the room thinking, wow, I really got something out of that. And then, of course, that is related to that last point of, well, why is it important to think about your audience before you present? Because it will affect every choice that you make, from the content, the title, the slide designs, as well as your delivery. Okay. Now, in terms of content, we do need to make sure that we're not increasing the cognitive load or the information overload that our audience will experience. So when you're researching, you need to really make sure that you're focusing on what is of most interest and relevance, and how can you contextualize that in a really simple, easy to understand, and preferably narrative way. Because we're humans, we are narrative, we are storytellers. So that will definitely help your presentation to be understood and to be processed by your audience members. So you might want to adopt a traffic light system of red is kind of nice to know. Like, if I've got the time, I'll add it in. Yellow or amber would be, this is important, it should be referenced in some way. And then critical is green, must be discussed or shared with my audience members. And it should probably be upfront, center page. So those are just some overall points that you need to consider, irrespective of the presentation style you are using. The next section of the workshop is going to go through paper presentations, poster presentations, and 3MT. We do have a few videos for you to watch so that you can see how other people have presented in each of these formats. And for each of these, I've also got a checklist for you. So if we go to, and I hope I've got it up on my other page. Yes, there we go. Beautiful. So this is the point where I am going to ask you to have open your handout. For those of you who have recently arrived, you can find the handout on our Canvas page. There we go. And so your handout should look like this. We've gone through activity 1. We're about to move into activity 2. For activity 2, you're going to watch the presentation. So if you click on this link, you can watch it on your own computer, and I'm going to attempt to play it on mine. But as you're watching through the first 6 minutes of this presentation, I want you to have a look at each of these points. And if you notice that the speaker is adhering to this point, give it a tick. If you notice that something is missing, feel free to write some notes on what you thought was not well done, or perhaps what you think you would like to then employ in your own presentation in the future. Okay. So we're going to give this a go. We're going to go from, for those of you who are watching on your own computer, we're going to go from 40 seconds in to about 6 minutes and 8 seconds afterwards. Let's see if this works. Does it work? Nope. Very quickly, just give me a show of hands. Would you prefer to watch it on your own devices? Just give me a thumbs up if yes, thumbs down if no. Okay, I think most people are going to watch on their own device. Great. I'll resume the workshop at 1:30. That gives you 7 minutes to watch, think about, and complete the activity.
I don't know if you found it. Surgery resident.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to Grand Rounds today. Distinct honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Van Riesma. She is just a wonderful clinician, a bright mind, a wonderful person. She went to med school here. We were lucky enough to steal her back from the University of Kentucky, where she completed her residency, to do a mixed fellowship in which she has excelled tremendously. And we are, again, very, very blessed and lucky to have her stay along and be a part of our division. She's going to make this place, already has a much richer environment and division. Our patients are going to be well.
Review the current therapies that are available for the medical management of pain. And I'm hoping to provide some practical approaches for pain management, utilizing current guidelines that can be accessible even to the non-MIGS providers. And then finally, I really just wanted to highlight that the current therapies that we have for endometriosis are not curative. Instead, they're suppressive. And we really should be utilizing a wide multidisciplinary approach and looking at endometriosis as a chronic disease that requires long-term management. And so endometriosis is defined as the presence of estrogen-dependent, progesterone-resistant specific lesions outside the uterus, and they create a chronic inflammatory reaction that creates chronic pain, organ dysfunction, and infertility. It's common, affecting 10% of reproductive age women, and it's actually the most frequently identified cause of chronic pelvic pain, with 40 to 80% of women with chronic pain having the diagnosis of endometriosis. So the symptomatology varies tremendously. Most patients experience some version of cyclic pelvic pain, but can also experience non-cyclic pelvic pain like dyspareunia, dyschezia, and dysuria. We know that pain severity does not correlate with the amount of disease that can be present or seen. And because of this complex nature, it can take 6 to 10 years really to get a diagnosis of endometriosis, which often results in women dealing with the consequences of long-term poorly managed pain. And so the etiology of endometriosis is really not fully understood, but the most commonly accepted theory is caused by retrograde menstruation. And so once you get this endometrial-like tissue outside of the uterus, it continues to respond to hormone in the same way as the endometrium. And because of this, we know estrogen plays a major role in the pathogenesis. And so this is the HPO axis. We know the hypothalamus secretes GnRH, which then acts on the anterior pituitary to secrete FSH and LH. LH acts on the theca cells of the ovary to create progesterone and androgens, and then the FSH acts on granulosa cells to then express aromatase, which is used to convert those androgens to estradiol.
So remember, just to the
So throughout the menstrual cycle, the estrogen and progesterone will have varying effects on the endometrium, with estrogen promoting proliferation and thickening during the
We've already
proliferative
completed the
phase,
checklist.
and
Or
progesterone
if you'd like to
suppressing
comment
endometrial
on
growth
your
during the
thoughts on this
secretory phase.
presentation, please feel
And we
free to
know
add it to
that
the
with
chat.
endometriosis, this tissue outside the uterus responds similarly. So estrogen tending to promote growth of these lesions and progesterone countering that effect. We know that endometriosis lesions do have their own estrogen receptors, and they can express their own aromatase. So this allows them to really create
Okay,
their own
what is
estrogen
time?
and create this hyperestrogenic
So
environment.
let's have a look at this presentation.
We also know that
was done
endometriosis
well,
lesions
and
can develop
perhaps what could
progesterone
have been
resistance,
improved. So
which
as we've
then
got in the
attributes to
chat
this
there,
estrogen
it
dominance
was
or
quite
imbalance.
information dense.
And so this
but the use of that
hyperestrogenic environment is thought to
Been a long day,
promote
everybody. My voice is
angiogenesis,
not quite working
neurogenesis,
the way it should be.
inflammation.
The
So
diagram.
these lesions can
was, in
actually
fact,
start
very
recruiting
helpful.
their own blood supply, their
And
own nerves,
when
and
I was
create a
talking
localized
about this
inflammatory environment.
presentation with my
All of
colleague,
those
we
things
both agreed that yes, it
contributing
was
to
very
lesion
information
progression
dense,
and worsening pain.
that slide with the diagram was also quite
So
dense,
that was a
but
lot.
what
And
saved
how
it
exactly
was
do
the
we
fact
go
that
about
she had
approaching
used,
treating this pain?
animations to show
I think it's
it
important to remember
appearing
that pain is
step by step by
complex,
step,
it's subjective.
and that reduced a lot of the
It's very
cognitive
difficult to
overload
pin
that
down and
people might
understand
have
patients'
otherwise
experiences.
experienced.
And so we
So
can't
that was
assume
quite an
that pain is
interesting
purely
point there.
physiologic or that the
Generally
degree of pain
speaking, though, if we
intensity
have a look
actually
at the
relates
slides
to the
there,
degree of
that
tissue
use
damage
of
present.
pictures depicting
So
women's
what that
pain
means
from
is that the more pain that someone
endometriosis,
has, it does not
that
always
really gave
mean
the
that they have a
presentation
more
a
painful
personal
stimulus.
touch. And for those of us who are a little bit more creative or we like to see things in a visual manner, that really did have an impact. When you move to the next slide where they were focusing on the objectives, these were very clear, they were logical. And with those first two bullet points, the speaker did link it back to the core subject at hand. So that there was a little bit of narrative storytelling at its finest. The bold text was used to draw the audience's attention to the keywords and the objectives, also again helping to reduce some of that cognitive overload. We can just pinpoint what it is we need through the bold text. That wasn't overdone either as well, so that was good. What we might have also noticed is that when she provides the definition, she's not just reading off the slide. She might be using some of those key phrases, but she does change the order. And that is what you want to do. You don't want to be reading word for word off the slide. Otherwise, really, what's the point of having you there? You could just give people a handout. There was a balance of text and visuals. Sometimes, though, it was a little too much text. So that was something that you might need to consider. We've got another comment here. The talk is very technical, but she does go straight to the content without the background. So there is the assumption that the audience is already familiar with the topic. Given that this presentation was at an expert meeting of practitioners around endometriosis, that kind of makes sense. But there was that use of the diagram to unpack quite a complicated process. So that was perhaps helpful there. What else? Should add picture in the front page? You don't have to have a picture in the front page is a comment in the chat there. It really depends on what kind of storytelling you're trying to, or what sort of message you're trying to convey. For this particular presentation, it was focusing on women's experiences of endometriosis-related pain. And so those images created that beautiful personal touch. And perhaps for those in the room who couldn't quite understand the experience, the visuals may have helped to really hammer home the points. Okay. What else? Something that my colleague and I thought when we were watching this presentation, we did feel like the delivery was a little bit of flat. There could have been a little bit more emphasis on certain words. She's pretty much standing stationary behind a very large monitor, and there's very minimal non-verbal communication going on. So that would have been something I would have changed from that presentation. In terms of the slides, how do we feel? We've got some comments that we've already got in the chat regarding the slides, but did you feel that they looked professional and clear? Why not? And did you feel like the slides were helpful for the audience? Yes, no, why not? So just have a short, quick reflection there. While you're reflecting on these questions, we've got 2 questions in the chat regarding the question of, do we need to use the USyd PowerPoint template? No, you don't necessarily need to use it. It's there if you wish to, but you should have a conversation with your supervisor. Some supervisors do prefer a consistent theme. Others will leave it entirely up to you. Okay, so we've got a comment here saying that the pictures were nice, and yes, it does look professional. So one of the things that does make it look professional is that it is very consistent in its font, the color that is used, but also it uses a fair amount of negative space, otherwise known as white space. So these are all really good elements of a professional looking slide. The use of the bold and the use of the animations to reduce the cognitive overload for that diagram, those were also quite helpful for the audience as well. I do agree. Text slides would have been better with bullet points for separate concepts. I do agree with that. Okay, great. So some things to note based on that presentation. And for your own presentations is that you do need to make sure that you're using consistent font and size. For people who are really sensitive to changes in the slides, this will be picked up and it will distract from your presentation overall. You also need to make sure that you're not overcrowding your slides. Try to limit it to 3 bullet points. And when you do use animations, use them to enhance the slide, not overload them. Make sure that's really important. Have I just done what I said? No, I have not. So as you can see, when we don't use a consistent font and size, when we do kind of overcrowd our slide, and when we use different animations, different bullet points, as well as when we don't use parallel grammar, in other words, each slide should, if I'm starting with a verb, each of the other points might need to start with a verb as well. The grammar that I use in those first bullet points should probably follow the grammar that I use in the next bullet points. All of this helps to create a consistent and professional looking slide. So this is also important for when you do copy and paste information from other sources. Make sure the formatting gets changed and everything is consistent. We've got a question here in the chat. Is there a possibility to change already uploaded slides? Now, I'm not entirely sure what the context of that is, so I might return to that question at the end of today's workshop. Okay. So a few more points, and this is talking about slide design from also an accessibility perspective, because we need to remember that members of our community might have different needs when it comes to color, when it comes to sound, when it comes to hearing and sight, as well as any other sort of learning difficulties that they may have. So to make it easy for the majority of people, or as many people as possible, try to aim for a simple contrasting background and text color. Avoid any overly elaborate designs or animations or color schemes. So as much as Canva has some beautiful designs, some of them are a bit overwhelming. When you choose a font text for the text itself, aim for 18 points minimum. Anything smaller than that can be really difficult to read, especially from the back of the room. And sans serif fonts are easier for people with dyslexia to read. So keep that in mind as well. If you're using PowerPoint, Office, or any other of the Word programs or the Office programs, they all have inbuilt accessibility checkers. So you may wish to check your slides based on those checkers as well. Yeah. Now, this is where there is a little bit of overlap. So what I've been saying mostly has related to the content of a research paper presentation, but it also does apply to presenting a poster. So we need to make sure that we're not trying to cram every single aspect of our research onto a paper presentation, and it's the same for the poster presentation. So aiming for overall 1,000 words or less over the course of your presentation. Make sure things are, of course, interesting and visually appealing. Now, visually appealing doesn't mean you need elaborate animations. It doesn't mean you need elaborate images, but it still needs to look nice. So part of that is having negative space, consistent fonts, consistent sizes. Negative space, again, just means white space. So you can see negative space over here and between each of my dot points as well. Again, it just reduces the cognitive load. So getting rid of any of that clutter. And if you do have extra information that you want to provide to your reader, whether it's an appendices or let's say the references, you can use QR codes to refer your readers to those so that they can obtain that additional information and you're not cramming it onto your slides. So moving on to the poster presentations. But before I do we have any questions about paper presentations that I have not talked about just yet? The chat here. Is there any possibility to change the already uploaded slides? The slides that I have uploaded to the Canvas website, I actually uploaded 10 minutes before today's workshop, so they should be the updated slides. Okay, so moving on to poster presentations. We are going to have a look at activity 3. So this came from 2020 during COVID, which is why poster presentations all went online, which has actually been very helpful because we can see a poster presentation being presented through this example here. Now, this is an online version of a poster presentation, which is vastly different to an in-person poster presentation where you will in fact stand in front of your poster and you will talk to the audience members who are around you. Now, that means that you're going to have a very casual, very conversational style of interaction where you may not go through everything point by point by point. People might ask you a question because they've read sections of your poster and you'll simply be responding to those questions. However, if somebody does turn up and they say, hey, can you please give me an overview of your poster, then you would be expected to give almost like an elevator pitch of the introduction, your methods, what you found, and your overall conclusions. This here is a 4-minute example of that spiel. Now, talking at somebody for 4 minutes is a little bit much, so you'd probably want to reduce it down to, let's say, a minute. Then allow them to ask you some questions about certain points. So with all of that in mind, let's see how this person has managed to go through and share the information on their poster presentation. For that, we will take you through to activity 3. So I will give you 4 minutes to watch it and a minute to do the checkbox activity, which means that I will return to speaking at, let's go at 1:50.
Amelia, sorry. For some reason, I had to come a bit later. Did you? Sorry, it was important. Did you upload some slides? Because I just had a look at what's available on the website, the General Hub website, but it's quite different to what you have.
Oh, okay. Hopefully the slides that I'm sharing, the link that I put in the chat right now, that should take you through to the workshop materials.
Okay.
And that should be the information that I uploaded 10 minutes before today's workshop. Let me just have a quick squeeze. So it should lead you to here. If you click preparing
slides. Yeah, so perhaps there were two different destinations on the website, and I didn't go through this one. So, yeah.
No, okay. So, yeah, the handout is there. The slides are there.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot, and sorry for eating your time.
That's absolutely fine. Okay, perfect. We've got about 5 minutes before 1:50. So if everyone could do activity number 3, that would be fantastic. Glad to see the links working. So just 3 more minutes.
Let's say you have 50K in cash and you use that to buy a $500,000 property to live in, which means
Parkinson's disease is characterized by the selective loss of dopamine neurons in a region within the midbrain called the substantia nigra. Now, this region demonstrates both the presence of iron accumulation and copper deficiency, and that region is also associated with the degeneration of this region.
And what we might perhaps do differently. I just want to establish that this particular poster came from this website here. And so if you are interested in watching other presenters talk about their posters, just to see the difference in delivery, then we do have 3 available for you to watch here. One is from Honors, HDR, and ECR as well. So I do recommend checking those out, as they do give 3 reasonably different methods or styles, I should say, of designing their poster presentation within the medical sphere. So just very quickly going back, okay, how did we feel about this particular poster presentation? Again, we do need to establish that the one-to-one collegial conversation is absent, but we can still look at things like the presenter's passion, the way that they organize their explanations, the way that their poster has been designed, and the layout of that design. So how did we feel about this particular presentation, or poster, I should say? Any comments? You could reference some of these points or include some of your own. I like this point. Yes, it's very busy with written information, and it is a fascinating topic at the same time. Now, this is a really great point. Okay, information was clear, easy to follow, bit too busy with the text. Yes. Oh, I love the comments that we've got going on here. Table of definitions was really helpful. Probably would have put it into the results rather than the methods. I'm going to have to disagree with you that, because those definitions there were needed as part of the process for doing the systematic review. So that's perhaps why it is better placed into that method section. How you would tell your narrative and justify it, you could potentially put it into the results if you wished, but I personally would not. Talking speed was good. Everything was presented in a logical manner. Again, we've got another tick on the too much text tally. More focus on the research. Could have had more passion. Yeah, good point. They could have used their tool, yep, the mouse, to guide the reader, which is very much what happens in the honors students' poster presentation. They actually move around the poster, zoom in a lot more. So I actually really liked that presentation in terms of engagement with the poster itself. And yes, we do notice that there are different font sizes. Now, having a different font for the titles and subtitles is absolutely okay. But when it comes to the main text, we do want a consistent size. So what was done well and what was perhaps not done as well? They do tick all of these boxes, generally speaking, in that it is a really well organized poster presentation. I felt that there could have been a bit more passion. But again, it is a video recording rather than a one-to-one conversation. So who's to say that, you know, maybe their personality doesn't lean that way, or they might have had a different presentation style when in person. Everybody who is mentioning that it feels like it is a little cluttered, yeah, I agree with you. And if you do have a look over, no, I've lost my page. Did I close it? I closed it down. When you do have a look at the 2 other examples, you see that those are also quite cluttered. So one thing that you'll notice with poster presentations, especially in the sciences, is that this is a very traditional style where it is reasonably text heavy. There is a movement towards less text, more conversation. So if you choose to use this more traditional style, that is absolutely fine. This poster did win an award, but you will find that there will be variation, and it really depends on you as an individual and how you want to convey your story. Less text would have been fantastic. You may wish to use visuals to represent some of those findings in a similar way to this presentation here uses this graph to represent the findings. More of that would be brilliant, but it depends on what your research is about and whether or not you can represent that information in a more visual manner or in shorter dot points, essentially. So we've kind of talked about each of these points. So now I'm just going to move on to some of the things that we can take away to make sure that your posters are well designed and just to see some differences. So on the next slide, I've got 2 posters. And although we said that that was quite text heavy, we're about to look at an example that is perhaps a bit more text heavy. So it's going to give you an understanding of, well, even amongst the text heavy posters, there is still a significant difference. So we do see that there is a greater amount of negative space in this poster in A compared to B. And that in of itself does make it easier to process the information, and it does make it a better design poster than B, which is the most traditional of traditional posters. We can see that there is a good use of color in A compared to B, and that color use is consistent. In fact, it's actually quite consistent with the university's color themes. So this is also something to keep an account of. Having said that, again, accessibility, if we've got color blindness, then some of these colors might actually be quite difficult to make out and to read the text from. So I don't know if anyone here in this room is colorblind. I would love to see your comments on A, on whether or not it does make it difficult to read. Okay. So just to recap some of those engaging figures, we do have a consistent color scheme. There is the use of images and figures to minimize the text. So we can see that very clearly here, the use of the table, but also the use of the graph over here. So these are all good design elements. Again, use of negative space. You can see that here, 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 and between these dot points over here. Versus the less engaging features of text B. Very text heavy, very dense, would take way too long for me to read. So in fact, I'd probably skim through that and then I'd walk away. Maybe I would not read it at all, and I would simply ask the person in front of it to tell me what does it say, because I just don't have that time. And yeah, lack of negative space with the exception of where the figures are. So take all of these into account. Now, in terms of the text, we've got, again, 2 examples of just the background and the objectives. Take a moment to have a look at example A and example B. And think about what do you think it says in terms of relevance, but also coherence. How well does it fit together? So we've got A, which comes from our honours student, and B, which comes from our PhD student. So again, we were focusing on notes. Got one comment suggesting that B is a little bigger, easier to read. Yeah, so larger fonts definitely help, especially when you're standing a meter away from the poster. Potentially 1.5 meters because you have to look over other people's heads. But in terms of the text itself, reading through it, okay. What about relevance? Does it tell a story? Does it all match up to the same points? Does it make it easier for the reader to understand what's happening? I like that point. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so the use of dot points is good, but the font is not easy. So what we're noticing at the moment is everybody is commenting on the style choices, less to do with the coherence of the content and the relevance of the content. So I might just move into looking at relevance and coherence. So what is relevant? Well, if you have a look at the content of the writing and what the meaning behind it, it is following its purpose, introduction. It's identifying the topic, and it's using language that then builds and follows on from what has previously been said. So set shifting, for example. And it does identify the significance of why. Okay, and again, we're using language that is repeated to create a sense of, yes, I'm still talking about the same topic. I'm elaborating, I'm moving on to a different point over here. So we've got language that relates back to the topic, tells the story. And in terms of coherence for number 2, it's a very similar story here, is that we're using our lexical items, our vocabulary, and we're using repetition to show that we are in fact continuing our same point throughout the entire paragraph. So we've got references to studies, we've got references to forms of studies, what's been included or not included in studies, with that repetition of protein and dysregulation. And we might have some synonyms or some different ways of phrasing things, but essentially we're heralding back to those same points. So the language that you use in the content of your text, you do need to make sure you're doing similar things. Okay, and just going back, there was a point there about vertical text. So here we've got aims, introduction, and hypotheses. Some people find that hard to read. So do keep that in mind. There's no problem using it, but it's just occasionally people will find it a little bit confusing. They might do this, lean their head to the side. But having things broken up into different boxes with very clear subheadings is a good way of signaling what information is about to appear in that particular box. Okay. So I've got a few more examples. Again, we're going to talk about section titles, visibility of research questions, and the wording of the research motivation. So we're having a look at A and B again with the inclusion of the research question for B. So between A and B, which would you say clearly outlines the research question from, let's say, a visual or an audience perspective? Oh, B. Okay. I'm inclined to say A more than B, but this is my personal interpretation. A simply because, yeah, it uses the language that one would expect to see on any form of research output, which is, this is my aim and this is my hypothesis, or this is my research question. Whereas if we have a look at B, we do have a question, yes, and it is clearly different to the rest of the text because we've got it in this orange box. But again, it's more implicit. I still have to interpret it as the research question rather than just a question. So if we have a look at A, okay, for A, the aims and the hypothesis, it could be a little clearer. Yes, we might use language which is more explicit. This research aims to do X. The questions that we will explore are A and B, could have been used, but the use of those subtitles do make it very clear regardless. Okay. What's really interesting is that they use active verbs, so to assess, to investigate, to determine. All of these are called active verbs. And I do recommend using them in your aims or hypotheses, simply because it does, again, show your intention. There are clear mentions of variables, which is, again, expected in a research hypothesis. Clear section headings, which are great. The rationale, though, I didn't see terribly clearly mentioned in the introduction, nor the aims, nor the hypothesis. So why did the researcher decide that this was worth researching? What's their story? What's their connection to this particular form of research? Why is this important to them or to the wider field? There is an implication that TMT does suffer from task impurity, which we're assuming is a negative thing, but it could have been a little bit more explicit. What we would expect, though, is there to be a conversation with the audience. So if you are in a face-to-face setting, you might not need to have everything written down explicitly, but do expect people to ask you those questions. Oh, I see you're doing this, but why? Why this particular project? Why this particular methodology? So those justifications may be worth including in your poster for the people who can't talk to you. There's a question in the chat. Is it still good to use sentences in posters rather than dot points? Either or is fine. You still need to make sure that your message is succinct. So if you feel that sentences like this work well for you and convey your message, go for it. If you feel like you can convey your message clearly and enough detail in dot points, go for it. Okay. So for this one, again, we've got some really good clear links between the rationale and the objectives for this section here. But what I do find with this, although we've got that good use of color to delineate the research question or one section from another, what I found when I looked at this was that this research question is disconnected. There is no section title to explicitly tie it to its function. And the language that is used to link the objectives to the background, although you can kind of infer it, there is no mention of copper or iron accumulation in here whatsoever, which for me was a bit of a disconnect because all I saw were studies. I noticed that there were differences. There was mention of proteins, there was mention of data, but again, no mention of iron or copper deficiencies. So I didn't really know how these two things connected to each other. Maybe those of you who are in this field would see that connection instantly, but remember your poster presentation, you might not be in a room full of experts in your particular subject. So those connections need to be made just a little clearer for everybody else. Okay. Now, visual data is really important, of course, and we do need to make sure that we're engaging people using our visual data. So black and white, probably avoid that because it's a little bit boring, but also you might have multiple variables and they do need to be represented usually in different colors. So when you do have your data, do consider what mode you're going to use. Is it a table? Is it a graph? Is it going to be a figure? What is most familiar to you might not always be the best way to represent the message behind that data. So we do have one example here, and there are a few things that are well done with this particular example. Group 2, continuous variables, and you can see how those colors work. The design is quite simple. It's got consistent lines and colors. And sorry, that should say an audience, not markers. Okay, there is the use of negative space that we can see over here, here, and here. There is also space for an interpretation, what this actually means. So whenever you have visual data, you should always explain what it means and interpret it for the reader. That can be a bit hard to do on a poster because you're limited. So it might just be a single dot point or quick summary. Alternatively, it's part of the conversation that you have with your audience members. So there's some examples. 2, okay, I quite liked this. It did have consistent colors and lines. Okay, it made very good use of negative space as well. And it has the text that does elaborate on its significance and what it means and what I should know by looking at this. So, yeah, well done. Yeah, hi. Okay, so negative space, negative space, sorry, I'm typing in the chat, equals basically blank or white space. Okay, so negative space is here, the spaces between each of these boxes, all of that is what we call negative space. No, we want to use. So we want to use the negative space. Exactly. No. We absolutely want to have as much negative space as our poster will allow, because if each of these squares were pushed together, my brain has to process a little bit harder to differentiate one piece of information from another piece of information. So that's the purpose of negative space. It gives my brain and everybody else's brain a moment to go, that was point A. This is point B. Fantastic, that's point C. We need negative space. No worries. Okay, third one, this one's from the honors student. I actually thought I actually really liked her results. I thought they were nice and colorful, quite consistently demonstrated. One could argue that they are a little bit busy because we do have these asterisks in each of these squares over here, each of them denoting a slightly different outcome or result. That is explained further down the bottom here, and I couldn't quite get a screenshot of it because she didn't scroll far enough down for me. But nonetheless, it is using consistent colors, use of negative space, and the text does explain what the acronyms are. So that's what this information down here is all about. And there is a legend provided as well. So again, it makes it easy to understand for the reader. This here is a different form of a graph or a table than I'm used to, but obviously it is well, it's used well to represent the information that this particular project produced. So again, think about what you need to use to demonstrate the message or the results of your research. Okay, so I'm going to pause there now and take any very quick questions about poster presentations that perhaps I've not covered. Got some echo going on. Any questions? No? Cool. Yes, of course. You can use parts of it, no doubt, but it would be the expectation that you create something a little bit different. We don't necessarily want to engage in self-plagiarism. So if you have submitted a visual abstract to a journal, it has then been accepted. It's kind of belonging to that journal now, so you can't just take it and use it as your poster for a conference. No, it's not yours anymore. It's theirs. So you can reference yourself if you wish to, but yeah, you can't just take it and use it as your poster for the presentation. Let's see, there's another question. Are there any useful templates for poster design? Look, there probably are. It will depend on the style, how much text you want versus how visual you want. A quick Google search will probably come up with a few decent examples. It's always good to build up a little bit of a repository of different template styles. I pretty much use the same one over and over for my own because I like it. So that's probably the unsatisfactory short answer of yes, there are, but I do not have any on hand because I don't know what you want personally to present and how you want to present it. Okay, other people have to head off. Fantastic. That's all right. There's an assumption that in order to catch the audience's attention to the speech, it's better to minimize the poster and just exhibit examples, definitions, bullet points, so less is more. What is the rule of thumb? This is, I'm going to give another unsatisfactory answer of it will depend on one, your purpose, two, the conference that you're going to and the expectations of the people at that conference. You do get some very pragmatic, practical type conferences out there, and they just want the examples, they just want the definitions, they just want to know how to apply things. They're not interested as much in the research behind it because they'll go read your paper that's been published. So for them, you might have a very different style of a poster compared to a very research, theory-heavy conference, and they're going to expect to see more of that information on the poster. Then they'll make the decision to go read your actual publication.
I just added that I'm in humanities, so that would influence those decisions, where less technical aspect perhaps and more in terms of description. Would that
yes. So I'm also in the humanities, education, and we do like the more practical side of things. We like the stories, we like the findings. So if you want to emphasize that and have the smallest of small sections for methodology, that is absolutely fine because people will come and ask you if they're interested. So a poster presentation does allow for a lot more freedom and flexibility depending on what style you personally feel is suitable. I did have a friend once who literally had a QR code in the middle to a range of videos that they had developed. Very short introduction, very short methodology, and a few takeaways down the bottom of what other teachers could do. And that was their entire poster presentation. So everyone was using the QR code to watch these videos and then have conversations. So like I said, a lot of these things, they're flexible when it comes to that poster presentation. Useful resources for producing visually attractive oral presentations. I'll come back to that one at the end. A lot of people like Canva. Again, it's going to depend on your mode and whether or not you need to do an A0 size poster or if it's going to be a paper presentation, if it's online, if it's in person. So there's a range of different things. So I'll come back to this one. Ayana, if I don't come back to it, remind me, please. Can you present the same poster and presentation at 2 or more different conferences? It's probably not a good idea. Again, it kind of counts as self-plagiarism, and some of the people who went to the first conference might very well go to the second conference. So in a similar way to you don't want to be salami publishing or salami slicing, in other words, taking a study and cutting it up into teeny tiny, very similar papers, your posters and your oral presentations might talk about the same points, but you do need to find a slightly different angle. So you're presenting slightly different or new information to your audience. That's the purpose. The caveat to that is you will see some keynote speakers who pretty much recycle their work, but they've kind of done the hard work through all of their years and they're that higher level that they can kind of bend the rules. So if you're starting out, put in the hard work, try to make your presentations different, have a different story or message or result to share with your audience members. Okay. 3-minute theses. Let's go. Remember that a 3-minute thesis is a competition. The focus of this competition is on communication, and so simplicity and clarity are key. It's designed to make sure that you're communicating and translating your research to that generalized audience, and that is why simplicity and clarity are key. You do need to make sure that you're focusing on your motivation, because your motivation is the story that hooks people in to your research. It also helps to connect it to its significance and its impact. And that significance and impact really should be related to something out there in the real world, not in the theoretical world. So have that big picture problem that you're addressing. And you can see that in the criteria that are used to judge you when you do a 3MT. And you can see very clearly that clarity is king. Okay, when it comes to your communication, the way in which you present the information, again, it's in the criteria. You're using non-specialist language. You're probably going to use quite emotive language as well. So you're going to emphasize things. You're going to use language that hooks into people's imagination. So for that reason, the use of analogy or metaphor are super effective. PowerPoints, if you're going to use them, well, you have to, but generally it's one slide. That tends to be pretty devoid of text. It should be pretty image driven. Again, images are more emotive. They hook into people's imagination and they can relate to images a lot better than just writing. And the way in which you communicate has to be impassioned. So you do need to make sure that your non-verbal communication is on point, your eye contact is clear, your stance is powerful, you're using hand gestures to emphasize certain points and to point to the relevant sections on your slide that you're using. Pausing to reduce the cognitive overload is important because pausing allows people to process your information, but it also creates melody in your speech because you're not just talking and talking and talking and letting your story continue on in this manner, but you're actually going to punctuate it with those pauses. So these are all things that we need to keep in mind for a 3-minute presentation. With that being said, I'm going to give you a moment to watch the 3MT example. So that should actually be activity 4. Apologies, made a mistake on the slides. Let's bring that up. Okay. So if you scroll on down, for those of you who can't access it, it's here. So for this one, it goes for, how long does this one go for again? Forgotten. 1 minute, I believe. 3, perfect. Of course, 3-minute thesis. I am a smart cookie today. Okay, you've got 3 minutes. I'm going to give you until 2:27. Is that 228?
Don't those eyes look creepy? But those eyes are intensely concentrating on the problem at hand. Cancer or not. A decision this pathologist has to make in a quiet room dozens of times every day. Life-changing decisions, and lots of them. The pressure is real. Don't make a mistake. What if those eyes, quietly watching alongside this pathologist, could whisper the correct advice? Help them make the right decision of cancer or not. Those set of eyes are what I'm developing with MEL AI, my research project using artificial intelligence to help distinguish melanoma from benign moles on pathology slides. Melanoma is Australia's national cancer, sadly, with over 18,000 new cases per year and more people dying from melanoma than car crashes. But frustratingly, distinguishing melanoma from benign moles under the microscope can be incredibly challenging. Pathologists have to subjectively weigh up the features to reach the diagnosis. And with subjectivity and variable levels of experience, these tumours can be prone to misdiagnosis.
Let's have a look at this one here. There we go. Okay, so this one, how did we feel? Any comments? Very dramatic, engaging approach. Language is clear and simple, even to the layman's ear. I like that. Yes, the visual is simple, but also abstract, has an emotional feeling to it. Definitely outstanding, yes. It is a great example. They won, so they did very well. There are so many 3MTs out there, so if you're interested in having a look at okay, not great, and outstanding examples, there's a range of them available on YouTube. So as everybody is pointing out, this particular presenter is fantastic, explaining very complex science and AI in a very easy, engaging, clear manner. So the visual that they're using, we can see it here, is quite evocative. It's very simple, but it does encapsulate the main topic of the video, which is that we're using AI to improve detection rates of the melanoma. And there is no text on this with the exception of MEL AI over here at the question. Now, the eyes here are essentially a metaphor for this presentation, but it's also a play on the word AI, eyes, and the role of the profession as well, which is focusing on melanoma. This all is really quite engaging and very fun. And here we've got that example of don't those eyes look creepy? So we're starting off with a rhetorical question, and this is acting as a hook to invite the audience to share in that attitude that is being presented. Yes, they are kind of creepy. So these are all really good ways to start off your 3-minute presentation, 3-minute thesis presentation. What we also noticed is that he has a really good signposting of his research story throughout. Very clear language is used to describe the problem as well as the motivation. So pressure, mistake, right decision, frustratingly, challenging, staggering problem. So you're noticing the emotive language there. Frustratingly, staggering problem, pressure, mistake, all things that make you feel. The aim, again, signposting, my research. Each of these are very clear. A subtitle would do in a poster presentation. Okay. And at the end there, we've got that looping back to the beginning with another rhetorical question. So all of these are really good things to note. And as we've mentioned in the chat here as well, there's that absence of any technical jargon. It is super easy to understand. Plus, the person is really engaging. We can see them pausing, waiting for you to take in the information, using their hands. They look passionate. All of this is wonderful. And what that actually helps to do is also maintain attention. So this is a big issue in a paper presentation because paper presentations are 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. And as we all know, I've been talking for almost an hour and a half, your attention starts to wane. And this is well researched and understood. So for this reason, verbal and visual strategies need to be used to keep people's attention, but also to help them to keep on top of what the information is about. If you do that, people don't go, oh, what were we talking about? Oh, I don't know where we're up to now. So signposting with visuals, signposting with subtitles, with titles themselves, signposting verbally are all good ways to bring the attention of the audience back to you. And maybe halfway through your poster presentation, it would be a good idea to have a moment to pause, introduce a rhetorical question, show an image of something, but do something a little bit different just to break it up and bring everyone's attention back to you as well. We've got a question in the chat, I think. 3MTs aimed at the general community or scientific audience. 3MTs, if we go back to our earlier slides, although the judges might have academic backgrounds, they're going to be hearing a range of presentations from a range of different fields. So you want to be speaking to the general community. It needs to be accessible by everybody. So you don't need to go into great amount of detail. If you start talking about your theory, you're probably going into too much detail. Okay, so these are some things to think about. Okay, so in terms of structure, this is for your 3MT. Because you've only got one slide, you can't use other slides to structure, okay, now we're going to talk about results, now we're going to talk about the discussion. You can't do that. So what you do have to do is use your language. Consider using perhaps a recap of the main points at the very end, having a takeaway message. You can be very explicit in that. What I want you to take away from today's presentation is blah. And this is because the last thing that we hear is often the thing that we remember the most. And this is going to be the same for any audience that you deal with. Okay. As you're going through each section, use your signposting language. The reason why I'm doing this, the aim of the project was this. What we found was this. So using the language that indicates to your audience what stage of your presentation you are at. We do have some examples of presentation signposts that you can use for any of these presentation formats. So I'm going to leave these here. They are simply just references for you to have a look at. Okay. For more information, is it okay to add a QR code to the 3MT presentation? No, probably not. A QR code for additional information is fantastic for a poster presentation, and it is fantastic for a paper presentation, because the expectation is the dialogue will continue and the connections will be made. 3MT, competition. Nobody cares afterwards, or at least the markers don't care. They're going home to have their coffee and their wine. So leave your QR codes for your paper presentations and your poster presentations. Visuals. Be very judicious in your use of visuals. With the endometriosis presentation, they were very relevant because they helped to contextualize and emphasize the pain women were experiencing when they were going or had endometriosis. It was linked to the topic, which was focusing on that pain. So make sure you're choosing images that are highly relevant and help to clarify the conversation you're having with your audience. Make sure you are using in-text citations and you are using a reference list. Now, your reference list could very well be 2 to 3 slides at the very end after the thank you slide, or it could be part of a QR code which people can scan and look at their leisure. Either is absolutely fine. What I would not recommend, and I have seen unfortunately people do, is give the entire reference on the slide with the main information. That unfortunately clutters everything up. So just use your brackets, Yarwood, 2025. That is all you need to do. If you're using a different form of citation, could be the one in the brackets with the little 1, you can do that as well. This is another point. So if you are using images, do think about the resolution. There are so many conferences I have been to where when it is put up onto that massive screen in the hall, all of the images are suddenly very pixelated because the person used a low resolution image which looked fine on their laptop when they were creating the presentation, but when projected up onto a much larger screen, didn't look like anything it should have. So use your high resolution images, especially if you're doing graphs or figures related to your methodology or your results. Okay. The next section is essentially just some general tips for all presentation types. And then I'll do a little Q&A and we'll be wrapping up. So thank you for sticking with me for almost 2 hours. So for preparation for your paper presentations for the conference, feel free to write out a script if it makes you feel comfortable. But what I do recommend is that you do not read from it, because what will happen is your voice will take on that readership quality where it's a little bit more monotone because you're simply reading information. It loses the expressiveness, and if you're looking down, not up, then the projection of your voice gets lost, and so the people at the back can't hear you. Plus, it doesn't look like you're engaging because there's no eye contact there as well. Dot points may be more preferable to an actual script because at least then you know what points you need to hit in your presentation, but it also has a more conversational quality. This is often what I do with my presentations, and this is probably also why you will hear me make mistakes, but it means that I can be a little bit more me and less reading from a page. Poster presentations, do prepare a short 1 to 2 minute summary of what you're wanting to talk about. to help just give a little bit of structure to your informal conversations. Again, you might want to use some dot points based on the headings of background, motivation, aims, methods, so on and so forth. Think about some of the questions people might ask you based on your research. And this is actually a good idea for paper presentations too, if there's a Q&A, and then write some dot points about how you might respond to those questions. For the 3MT, you do not bring in a piece of paper with you. You cannot read it from a script, so you do need to memorize and practice what you're going to say. I recommend you do that in front of multiple different audiences so that you can really understand whether or not you are being clear and simple in your expressions, but also engaging. Before you do your presentation, always check out the room and the equipment, especially if you're using a laptop, which requires a HDMI or a C-type lightning type cable. Some rooms will have that equipment, some rooms will not. There are so many stories where people have had to fix technical problems about 2 minutes before their presentation and sometimes 5 minutes into the beginning of their presentation. So be prepared, bring your own cables, double check what the rooms are like, double check the size, double check the lighting, double check how many screens you've got. And warm up your voice. There are so many tips and tricks you can find online. Just type in vocal coach or voice warm-up exercises. Do some of these before you give your presentation because it will help you to enunciate and speak clearly, which is always great. So how about, perhaps better than spending half a second looking at the individual in the eyes to make conversation, rather use the fourth wall. What do you think? I'm a fan of the fourth wall. So eye contact is always an interesting point for presentations. Did you want to elaborate?
I used that when I was doing my project presentation for my honors, and I thought it was actually helping, but perhaps it's my imagination, but I thought it was helping to also keep people on board. To, it's like all of a sudden it's addressed to you. So to create that connection, it doesn't mean that I was myself involved, so in a way it's kind of replacing the fourth wall, this kind of imaginary screen that sort of protects you from the audience, what they use in theater. But instead I decided to, assume the role of someone connecting with someone to make sure that they got the point.
Yeah.
But, do it very, very quickly and try to change my direction a lot. Yeah. And so, I still had something, notes, not reading notes, but more bullet points to make sure that I was on track myself. Yeah.
Perfect. So for those of you in the room who are not familiar with the concept of a fourth wall, if you've watched the Deadpool movies, this is a great example of breaking the fourth wall. It's the idea that there is a screen between you and the audience, and you imagine the audience is not there. So you're just doing your thing. To break the fourth wall means that you acknowledge that I'm here giving a presentation, you're there listening to me give a presentation. So sometimes what we can do in presentations to connect with the audience is ask a direct question to the audience member. Have you had that experience? Oh, yeah, I have. Yeah, fantastic. Me too. It could be that, or it could be, wow, I'm actually really nervous about giving this presentation today. Anyone else relate to that? Everyone laughs in the room. Fantastic. Feeling a little less nervous. It's one way to create connection. Another way, you can look at someone very specific, give them a little nod, say a point and sort of give it especially to that person. If you know some of the people in the room, that can be a really great way to show that you're engaging with the audience as well. So these are a few different things you can do just to really make your presentation dynamic. In terms of delivery, which again relates to giving a dynamic presentation, for those of you who might be a little concerned about your pronunciation, especially about technical words or ones that are not often used, Youglish and Forvo are fantastic for checking your pronunciation against different accents and different speakers. Forvo in particular, not just English, but any other language as well. It has pronunciation. Great if you're learning a different language. Pause. Don't forget to pause. Again, why do we do it? To create melody in our sounds, to bring people's attention back because something different has happened, to give people time to process information. So do have your pauses, even if you're nervous. Chunking, what do I mean by chunking? Chunking means that you basically put your information into little categories. You go through category 1, give a pause. Go through category 2, give a pause. Go through category 3, give a pause. The use of titles and subtitles can be a way of chunking information. In terms of speaking, it also means that you put in your sentence this one piece of information I'll say, and then I'll pause it because that information goes together in one little category. And then, of course, speed and volume. You don't necessarily want to modulate or move your volume too much during a presentation, but there might be a story that you tell in which you might bring your volume down a little because it's a sad story and you're wanting to connect to your audience and to get them to feel the emotion that you're getting. Or you might get really excited about different results, and so your pitch might go up. This form of modulation can help with your delivery and make your presentation more engaging. This one, rehearsing the transition between the slides. Similar to what I just did there, where I paused, looked at my side, and then went, what am I going to say? Rehearsing your transitions between the slides and how you connect one piece of information or one slide to another is really quite important, because this is where people tend to forget what their next point was. And that can make that little awkward silence moment while you're gathering your thoughts and your feelings. It can mean that you sometimes stumble over what you're about to say, and then you have to backtrack. All of which is fine because it's very natural, and even the most seasoned presenters are going to do it. But if you want to avoid it, do rehearse the transition between the slides. Okay, we've talked about eye contact and speak to, not in front of the audience. We've also talked about that. Try to engage with the people, look at them, make reference to something you see in the room or someone you know in the room. Hand gestures, I maybe give too many hand gestures. Some people do, some people don't. But whatever you do with your hands, just try to make sure that they're not clasped in front of you like this the whole time or behind your back. Do something with your hands occasionally. Focus on the meaning. So if you're trying to emphasize something, you might bring your hands up like this and go, this is why we do this. This is the result. Why? So think about the message that your hands are telling other people. Just don't move them around too much like I do sometimes, because it gets very distracting. Open stance is also an important thing. Yes, you have a podium, but you don't want to be standing behind it the entire time. You might want to move out just from behind the podium like this so that people can see you and you've got that open presentation, and it just helps people to connect to you better. Now, question and answer is perhaps one of the most terrifying parts of a conference presentation, poster or paper, either one, because, well, what happens if you don't get any questions? Then you've got that awkward silence. So if you do notice that nobody does have any questions and there's still 5 minutes, you can choose to finish the presentation and say, well, if there's no more questions, enjoy the day, everybody. I'm going to be here for 5 minutes. Sometimes people want to speak to you one-on-one. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable asking the questions. So that is a tactic you can take. You can also prompt the audience by saying, well, since there's no questions, I do want to just talk a little bit more about one point. So I'm often asked about ... Or here's a question you might be wondering about. And then you can answer it. If, however, you do get a question, listen carefully to it, because often we're nervous and we misinterpret the question. Wait until the person asking the question has finished so you don't interrupt or respond inappropriately. If you need to, you can write down keywords so that you can reference back to it. That's absolutely fine. Feel free to restate the question. So what I hear you saying is, or so if I understood the question correctly, you'd like to know whatever else it is. This is really helpful because one, it can help you to stall, and that means that you're thinking about the answer. Two, it helps to make sure that you did, in fact, know what the question is. Can you bring a friend who will be the dummy who asks you a question? Absolutely. Do it. Do it, do it, do it. Even better if it's your supervisor, but nobody else knows that they're your supervisor. Now, with answering the question, what to say and how to say it, there are some really great videos, especially from the Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast about structures and how you can use those structures to help you answer a question. There are so many different frameworks out there. I really do recommend looking into them. One of the ones that I'm familiar with is the basic beginning, middle, end. Beginning, restate the question. Or give the topic sentence. So in terms of topic, middle tends to be your 3 points. In terms of X, I've got 3 things to say, A, B, and C. And then C is close. So does that answer your question? And so that's why I think basically create that short little structure. You can, of course, use an impromptu framework, which basically means you answer as you would anybody else without any preparation. And then there are other frameworks that you can look at. So we've got some examples here. Yeah, we've got some other structures there. Here's the problem with that particular topic, or here's the problem with your question. Here's the solution, benefits, so what? What, so what, now what? These are good structures to use. If you don't know the answer, it's absolutely okay to say, to be honest, I don't know the answer to that question, but if you give me your email, I'd love to send you a response later. It's okay not to know everything. You might say, to be honest, I just don't have the answer at the top of my head. It's there somewhere in my research and I'll get back to you later. Or you can seek collaboration from the audience. I don't really know the answer to that, or I don't feel like I've got a satisfactory answer, but I'd love to know if anyone in the room does. Open it up to everybody else. If your supervisor's in the room or your co-collaborators are in the room, might be a great opportunity for them to speak. Nerves, we all experience them, especially in presentations in front of others. I personally get really nervous for about the first 2 minutes, and then after that, I'm actually really quite fine. I love Q&A more than I love presenting. There's just something more organic about it. We all have a different process. Try out some deep breathing. Box breathing is really helpful. If you notice that your hands get clammy, they get a little sticky, a little hot, hold on to a cold beverage. That will actually help to reduce your temperature, and it will help to reduce your nerves as well. So that is a good trick. Prepare and practice, because that will give you confidence. Try to present in front of a small group of your research mates or your supervisor, friends, family, whoever. Just get used to the experience, and it will, after time, become more natural, less terrifying. So nerves, they are fine. And finally, the last slide. These are very common examples of what we see on last slides, but they are a missed opportunity. So in addition to having thank you, any questions, have your information there. Who are you? which university do you belong to? What's the name of your project? What's your LinkedIn, your ResearchGate, your, ORCID ID, any of these things, so that people can contact you later. Have that information there on your final slide. Okay. And that is basically all from me. I'm very impressed with myself. I've got 5 minutes before the end of today's workshop, which is exactly enough time for you to complete our feedback form. It is there. And if you have got our handout, if you scroll down, I've got a few different resources that you can look at here. So the Think Fast, Talk Smart podcast is there. It's got lots and lots of really good tips. I really love what they have to say about presentations and answering questions. So do check it out. Forvo and English are there, and the feedback form is also here as well. Okay, so while we're doing that, I will start answering some questions. Okay, first question, Ayana, you had that question, which I think, did I talk to it? Or did I come back to it already? I think the question was about useful resources to produce visually attractive oral presentations. Okay, so for the useful resources, you do have Canva, which is very popular with everybody. Any number of the AI image generators can be useful as well for creating images that you can use. You've got your free Imager. You've got that Icon 8. 8 is useful for little icons if you want to use them. So you'll notice in a lot of the university presentations, they've got these little icons which represent topics or categories. Using those icons can be really helpful. Canva was the other one. AI image generators. These are all very good as well. So I think they're probably the main ones. I'm sure there are other resources that you can use. So if anybody else has resources that you use, please throw it into the chat. It's always good when we create a community and share our resources with everybody. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. And the next question. Dear Yi, I've answered your question regarding are we allowed to do the same or similar presentation for a university conference and one other? Same as my response before, you should make it different enough. So while the main information might be the same, the study might be the same, you should still make it different enough. Does practice really make perfect? I love that. Look, the answer is probably not. One, because we can never achieve perfection. We are very, very human, and how we feel on the day is also going to impact our performance. Your sleep, what you've eaten, how much coffee you've drunk, how you feel about the people in your room, all of this will change the presentation you will give. I can remember one example where there was someone who was just looking so sour and so bored in the front row, and that's all I could focus on. And so unfortunately I did stumble. After the conference, I actually had a conversation with that person, and they actually really liked it. It was just they had this blank face the whole time. So you practice to improve your confidence, you practice to improve the clarity, but practice is not going to achieve perfection. That's my realist answer. How many times should you practice? I would say at least 3 to 4. Because 3 to 4 will allow you to work out the kinks of what you say, the transition between the slides, and it should give you time to realize, am I speaking too fast or too slow? So minimum 3 to 4. Ooh, biorender. I like that. Thank you. That's a good example. If you use AI pics to create pics, should you reference it? You can if you want. Not everybody actually references where they get their pictures from, which is naughty of us, but it is also a fact of the matter that we don't always follow proper image referencing. Are we allowed to use AI to help us in preparing? I don't think I've seen anything that says no. Remember that you are accountable for your presentation. It is still your intellectual work, so to speak. And so whatever that AI does generate, make sure it actually matches what you've done and what you want to say and how you want to convey the information. But also acknowledge that you may need to edit whatever the output of the AI is, because it might not be your style, like your sentence, your grammar, it might be a bit different to what you would naturally say. So keep that in mind. If the question is hard in the Q&A, am I allowed to skip to the next person? No. No, you can't just ignore someone who asks you a question. What you do if the question is hard is you say, I'm really sorry, I can't give you an answer right now. Please ask me again later, or give me your email and I'm happy to send you a response. That's the best thing that you can do. And you will get hard questions. Alternatively, what you can say is, to be honest, I haven't thought about that, but it's a really good question and I'm going to think about that later. And then just leave it there. Okay. Conferences, are there rules specifying your, no. It's not good practice for your supervisor or your lab mates to ask questions in your presentation. You are wanting other people, but in the end, they might not have seen your presentation. They might genuinely have questions to ask. So there are no rules that I've ever seen that dissuade a supervisor or lab mates from asking a question. It's going to be bad practice if they're taking up all of the time, and you don't want it to happen too often. But I haven't seen any rules. Okay. I think that's all I can really say for the moment, because we are going over time. So if someone can test the validity of a point and suggest you show them the details after the presentation, that helps not to lose credibility. No, true. Yeah, so you are going to get people challenging your work. They're not going to like your methodology. They're going to think you misapplied it. All of these are really fruitful conversations and they're worth having. Having said that, there are also some people in the academic world who have an opinion and are stubborn about it, and they might not be correct. So you still have to be able to engage with these people. You need to be able to push back when you disagree, and you need to be graceful when you realize that maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe your supervisor didn't realize it. Maybe you didn't realize it. Maybe this is worth taking into consideration. So you do need to deal with both sort of questions and responses. And it's going to be up to you as to how you deal with them. But you're wanting to be able to maintain your reputation and maintain a stance as someone who is open and willing to engage in a conversation. Okay. Right. That's all from me. I'm going to have to end there. Hope that was useful, everybody. And thank you to the 23 of you who have stuck around to the very end. Right.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Amelia. It was great. Thank you.
Glad you enjoy it. Thomas, you are here yet again.
Thank you.
See you later. Goodbye.